fresh bean. See it down there? Isn't that gorgeous? Good morning, welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather. It has been raining a lot here. I know I've been talking about that a lot because it's been a pretty big deal. But because of that, we have seen an explosive amount of growth in the garden and actually in the greenhouse in the last week. And so I'm really excited to show it to you guys. I also plan on showing you some places that I tend to overlook in the garden tours. This is a brand new plant that we got this year. These are key limes. These are not frost hardy at all, like not even a little bit. And so we've got them in this rolling planter so that when the frosts come, we can roll it into our climate controlled shed here and hopefully keep ourselves in citrus. This particular plant didn't flower this year, so I don't think we have any limes, but there are some little ones over here. We've also got this area right here, which looks kind of dumpy. This is our compost area. And the way that I do compost is I just sort of lay down food scraps, animal bedding, really anything down over here, anything that's compostable. And I sort of leave it alone. It's more like a stagnant pile, I guess, but it grows things every year. This is some kind of squash. I can't tell yet. It does have little buds on it down here, but I think that these are male flowers. So I don't know what this is. We do have some kind of bean variety. And back here, we have a tomato that has some flowers on it. So that's kind of fun. I think today we'll enter the raised bed garden from the side. You can see that it's filled out quite nicely. I half expected not to have any kale to show you this week because we've seen a lot of those cabbage loopers, but honestly, they really haven't done a lot of damage. You can see the kale over in this bed actually looks really good too. And the only explanation that I have for the way that the kale looks right now is wasps. So I don't love them, but they do a lot of good work in the garden. Wasps like to feed their young protein, and they'll come along in the garden and pick off the cabbage loopers that tend to affect things like our kale. And so even though I don't love them, I can tolerate them because they do help me out a little bit. I am going to harvest this later, and I don't know how long we're going to be able to keep harvesting because our days are warming up, but so far we're still in kale. On the other side of the kale is our blackberry patch. We put this in, I think in 2021, they were just little plants. I bought this little 6-cell tray from Stark Brothers. These are triple crown thornless blackberries, and this is what we have now. It's a lot. There are tons and tons of green berries all throughout here. We had quite a big harvest of blackberries last year, and this year it's probably tripled the crop that we're gonna get. The way that blackberries work is they'll put on their fruits on their second year canes. So everything that you see fruit growing on now, that is growth from last year. These plants have been putting out some new canes, like right here. This one is brand new. We're not gonna get fruit on this part this year, but that's what's gonna fruit for us next year. We've got new growth here and new growth here. Lots of new growth. I have been trimming back some of the new growth because it's a wild patch. I can accept that, I love that, but I do need to keep it somewhat contained, and the animals have really been loving what I've been able to cut off for them, so it works out. It's food for us and food for the animals. The zinnia bed is getting some buds on it, you see that? We're gonna be having flowers next week. The elephant garlic is looking sadder and sadder every week, but this is actually a good thing. The tops of the garlic are really gonna start to look kind of dead and dry and sad. That means that all that energy is being put down into the bulb. And it's gonna be a few weeks, but we are getting close to harvest time. This bed of lettuce here is still doing really great. I am starting to see a couple of them start to get a little bit tall in the middle, like this one here. That means it is going to flower. I'm gonna pull these out soon. I have a lovely perennial thing that once it comes in the mail, this is where it's gonna live. Pretty excited. The tomatoes in the green stalk are so heavy with fruit. Look at all the tomatoes on this plant. Like, they are just chock full of fruit here. Look at this one. They're getting heavy and they're starting to lean over. I have noticed we do have our first blushing tomato of the season. These will ripen to red, so we're going to be watching that one closely. Hopefully I can get to it before any kind of bugs do. The Kalima bush beans started flowering a couple of weeks ago, and we're starting to see the results of that. Little tiny beans. And this is really exciting. I have quite a few canned beans still, and actually some beans in the freezer from last year and the year prior, but I love a good fresh bean. Saute it up in some bacon fat. It'll be so good. We're so close to blooms on the zinnia. So excited. Last week before the garden tour, I planted some sunflowers out on this end where we used to have a whole bunch of lettuces. You can see that the sunflowers have started to germinate. I did sow them pretty thickly here. I just took like large pinches and stuck them in the ground because historically the birds and bugs do like to come by and pick at my seedlings. So if I have a bunch of them planted, there's more option for one of them in each hole to do pretty well and make it through. So for now, I'm not thinning them out because they're still at that pretty tender stage, but pretty soon I'm gonna have to thin them out to one plant per planting hole. We have a very similar situation over here. This is our archway, and at the base of it, I've planted two different planting holes of loofah. That one and this one, there was 4 seeds put down into each, and all 4 germinated. Same thing with these. I'm gonna thin it out, but I need to wait and see if, you know, the birds thin them out for me. We don't usually see the archway coming from this direction, but the lettuces are doing their thing. They are going to flower. So far, no flowers yet, but this is gonna be really pretty when they do. I noticed that we are also getting blossoms or little buds on our Kelway Golden Chamomile. This is new for me this year. I've never grown this. This specific type of chamomile isn't necessarily a tea type of chamomile like Roman chamomile is, but it has these big, beautiful yellow flowers that I've heard people have used to dye things naturally. That's pretty cool. And it's also perennial. So the normal or the common German chamomile that you see, it's not necessarily perennial. It does tend to reseed very readily. This is the first year that we have not seen it come back. I did scatter a little bit of German chamomile or Roman chamomile seed in this bed along with the Kelway chamomile, but it looks like I didn't get any of that this year. So next year I'm going to be more intentional about planting the Roman chamomile, but this is nice. Filling out really well, and we're very close to getting some flowers. Our dill bed is filling out really nicely, and we're starting to get blooms here as well. I believe this variety is the bouquet dill, so these get really big. These smaller ones are small for a couple reasons. I bought these at our local plant nursery, so they're a different variety more than likely, but also I kind of left them in their start pots a little bit long, so they got a little bit stunted, but they're coming back. I've already made lots of things with fresh dill, to include cheeses and different soups. I made a potato salad last night, put this in it. It was lovely. Do you guys remember the walking onion top that we set down into the ground? It was kind of like this. It is down here, kind of in the shade, but just for science I pulled it up, and we have a slug, but also a root. So that is doing its thing. I'm gonna put it back. The grapes are reaching up the trellis. They recovered from the hail damage really well. You can't even tell really where it was that it got topped off. It's not very far from reaching the top. And once the grapes reach the top of the trellis, I am gonna top it off and encourage side growth. So this will look very different and not very long. I had been saving a nice, beautiful red strawberry on the side of the bed. This was so big and it was so gorgeous, and something has come along and taken it. Yesterday the kids saw a small skunk running along the fence here. That fence is just cattle width or whatever. It's field fencing, so little critters that like to eat garden things can definitely come in here. It got that strawberry that was along the bed, but it left this one. This one isn't quite ripe, so I'm gonna leave it. We're gonna risk it. Usually critter impacts on my garden are not too bad. It's not worth to me necessarily at this point especially to do anything beyond just sort of live with the critters. You could put electric netting or something around the garden. I've heard that there are different oils or sprays that you could put around the garden to deter pests. I haven't found those to work. But like I said, it's usually not a big deal. We've got backups to our backups. I have had a lot of strawberries growing in the greenhouse. And this patch is doing well. It just now started putting on fruit. This blueberry patch is brand new this year. We just put these plants in. These are legacy blueberries. I have a very small handful of berries on the end here that are starting to change color. Honestly, I fully expect a bird or something to come by and get those, so I'm not holding out hope that I get to taste these this year, but in future years we will definitely partake. The alyssum has come in quite nicely underneath of them. I have not trimmed these back yet. I have been really enjoying the blooms. See this right here? This is what happens. You can see we've got fresh growth on the top, but then down here, these spent blooms have created this capsule, and inside that capsule is a little tiny alyssum seed. And the fact that alyssum readily reseeds is why I stuck it here. I would love it to be a living mulch here in my garden. I'm gonna try to get you to see this. Oop, it closed up on me. There it goes. Do you see this little tiny seed pod, and it opened up? There's one tiny seed inside there. That little tiny orange thing, that is an alyssum seed. And I want it, there we go. And I want to encourage it to reseed, hopefully year after year. That would be great. The awesome thing about alyssum and why it works so well as a living mulch is that its root system does not compete with the root system of the plant that you put it near. So it's a really great and beautiful, fragrant living mulch that I hear is also edible. I have not done anything with it, but it's really nice that it is so useful and usable in the garden. The asparagus is still kicking. We've had a few more that we've just let to do their thing, turn into these beautiful fronds. This particular one looks like it has started to put on little flowers. Not all asparagus will put on the flowers. Believe it or not, there's male asparagus and female asparagus. I'm assuming it's the female ones that put on the flower. And later on in the season, we'll see all kinds of little red berries. I'll be sure to show you those. Oh, does this count? Are we there yet? It's not fully open. Oh, it's gonna be gorgeous. My elderflower is officially abuzz with our honeybees, and I have picked over 80 blooms off of this one plant to make elderflower cordial. And you can see there is still plenty for the bees, and there's still plenty to let turn into berries and do something with later on in the season. I'm still undecided whether or not I will do anything with the elderberries this year, since I have so much elderberry syrup and things from last year. But in the very least, we can let it feed the bees and the birds. And this is another really awesome perennial that I'm very glad that I planted. And the bees is exactly why I planted it. The fact that we get anything out of it is a bonus. We had unboxed some gooseberries in the last garden tour, and I got them potted up. These are just recycled from things like those key limes over there. So far, I haven't seen them really wake up, but they've got their roots in the soil, and they'll be waking up soon. I also don't see any germination quite yet on our chicken and dumplings cowpeas, but those guys are in here. I planted those in a recent vlog. The reason that I did not put those chicken and dumplings cowpeas in the ground just right away is because we've had a lot of rain and the ground is really muddy and soupy. So hopefully by the time they are ready to be put in the ground will be ready to accept them, because that's not the case right now. Hi girls! Hello mama's goats. How are ya? Good morning, Tori. Good morning, Winnie. Good morning. The kids' garden is plugging along. I transplanted some strawberries over here a couple of weeks ago, and you can see that the foliage died back, but we've got plenty of green popping up in the middle. See, this one's starting to come back. This one looks really good. Those are free plants. We might not get much fruit out of them this year, but that's okay. They'll establish in there and that'll be awesome next year. So far we've had pretty good germination on the pumpkins over here on the pumpkin patch. These are Dutch fork pie pumpkins. Just last week we had a few seedling leaves, and now they're starting to put out their true leaves. These guys are going to grow really fast. I did put 2 seeds per hole. Some of them we don't have any germination. Most of them we just have 1 seed that germinated. And in the holes where we did have both seeds germinate, just like with the seeds in the raised bed garden, I'm gonna leave these for a little bit, but I will have to thin that out. In theory, we could gently tease those extra plants out of the hole and put them in the holes that didn't get any germination. But things like cucurbit plants like cucumbers, melons, squash, things like that, they don't love their roots disturbed. I mean, I could try it as opposed to putting nothing in those holes, but it probably is gonna stunt them to where it's not really worth it. I'm actually thinking about putting sunflowers in the empty holes. You can see that something has come along and given these seedling leaves a little bit of a nibble. So we're not out of the woods yet with these. They're still really tender and things can happen. So we're still crossing our fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of the 17 holes have plants. Like I said, I'll be happy if we get 1 pumpkin to maturity. Like 1 actual pumpkin, not just 1 plant. I just want 1 pumpkin. There we go. I did decide that at least for now, when we come in here and do the garden tours, I am gonna unplug the fans. It's not super annoying, but it's a little bit annoying. So now you guys will be able to hear me a little bit better, which is good because we have exponential growth. So last week I talked about how some of these plants weren't looking too good because they have what I believe is a tomato curly top virus, and I think a lot of them still do have that, but they're growing a lot despite that. You can see that these leaves are curled and weird looking, but we've got lots of flowers coming on. These have probably doubled in size since last week. I keep coming through with my tomato taper and tying them up. Because I've had so much fun doing that in the evenings, I haven't had a chance to really show you how this works, but a lovely viewer sent this to me from our Amazon wish list. This guy is a game changer for tying up plants that need it. So I've just been coming through and popping off the tomato suckers on these plants as they grow. You can see here that this plant I have let become 2 different leaders. A lot of times when you're planting tomatoes pretty close together like I am, these are around 12 to 18 inches apart. You need to be pruning them pretty heavily so that they can maintain good airflow. This one, like I mentioned, has 1 leader. This one I let branch out into 2 different leaders, and it doesn't really need it, but just to show you how it works, we're gonna tape this to the trellis. So what we do is we grab our doohickey, we carefully place it around the plant and around the trellis, give it a clip. See? It's really fun and it's really fast, and it was pretty inexpensive. It came with like, I don't know, 20 rolls of tape. It's gonna last a really long time, and obviously we can get refills. And as I mentioned, a lot of our tomatoes that do look kind of sad have been flowering, and it's probably pretty impossible to see in there, but there's a little tiny fruit set on that plant. So even though there is a measure of disease over here, they're still gonna be pretty productive, at least productive enough to make me happy. So I'm leaving them. I noticed these massive blooms yesterday. This is a Dr. Witchies or Dr. Weish. These are the biggest tomato blooms I think I've ever seen. The first plant to put on fruit inside the greenhouse is this Roma tomato. You can see it down there. I feel like tomatoes, they stay green forever, so it's gonna be a little while, but that makes me so excited. For the longest time, we just had 1 tomatillo over here. You can see it down there, but now we've got a whole bunch. This plant is gonna be loaded really soon. Looks like I'm seeing my first sign of disease over here. What I do with diseased leaves is just pull them off. A lot of times disease on plants on that particular leaf is just not gonna get better, and so it's better for the plant to just pull it off so that it doesn't put energy into that leaf at all. That leaf really isn't giving back to the plant at all, and so it doesn't hurt just to pull it off. I was looking at this bigger tomatillo. It looks like a lot of our fruit, if not all of it, is on the smaller one. But maybe we're starting to get a little bit of pollination over here. I guess we'll see. We'll watch that one. Oh, there's one. So the bigger plant is setting fruit. Those fans really do cool this down a lot. It actually got hot in here pretty fast. Our Malabar spinach has started to climb. It doesn't put out tendrils, but a lot like cowpeas, what it does is just coil around the trellis. Super cool. I promised you all I'd show you how the bonfire peach trees are doing. And here they are. Now, before we added the shade cloth to the greenhouse, most of these leaves were this dark burgundy red. But after we added the shade cloth, it was not very long before they started to look more green. So isn't that cool? The plant knows what it needs to do with the lower light. And we do have a few fruits in here. See that peach? They're still really little. We've let it grow a few peaches this year. And this one over here, it's doing the same thing. I have this tomato planter down here that I've been using. This is a Roma tomato. This tomato has also been looking pretty sick basically since it germinated. I started the seed straight in this pot. But like the other plants, even though it does appear to have this virus, it is putting on some flowers and it has grown quite a lot in the last little while. So I'm gonna leave it. Some of the plants that look the best in here are actually some of the ones that volunteered, and I have decided I'm going to treat these just like they were intentionally planted, so I have trellised them up. These are yellow currant tomatoes that love to volunteer on our property, and one of these plants did have some fruit on it. Okay, it's actually this one right here. See those? We do have that tiny Tim tomato in the raised bed garden that is flushing, so it's going to be the first ripe tomato of the year. Usually it's the yellow currant tomatoes, but not this year. A couple tours ago, we topped off this lettuce leaf basil, and that's encouraged it to get more bushy. You can see the ground cherries that I have on the other side of these tomato plants have really started to fill out. Let me show you what it would look like if we hadn't planted those out. It's incredible what the right amount of nutrition can do for a plant. I've left this guy over here just so I can show you this. This plant is alive, but it's not thriving. It's been this size for, goodness, at least a few weeks, probably up to a couple months at this point. And look at the difference. This little tiny plant is the same age as this big giant one. This one obviously has room to grow and a lot of nutrition, and this one doesn't. The golden acre cabbages are starting to put a little bit more effort into some upward growth. I just transplanted these probably about 10 days ago, and so they spend a lot of time working on their root development when you transplant them, and then they'll put energy upward. Some of them didn't make it, but that's okay. This week, after all the rain that we've gotten, is supposed to be a cooler week. It'll be cooler in here when I can turn the fan back on, and we may actually get these to head. These are supposed to be a 45-day cabbage, and they only get to be about the size of a baseball. I'm really excited. If this doesn't work out, if we planted them a little late, that's fine. I'm going to order more seed and we'll grow them over the winter. Do you remember how I had some pretty wilty looking eggplants last week? This is not one of them, but I wanted to show you. We are getting some flowers. This one actually has been in bloom for a couple of days, and it looks like it may have set a fruit. Sometimes when the flowers start to wilt, you can kind of lightly tug on them and the flower pops off, but I'm not trying to pop the entire thing off, so I'll leave it alone. We'll look at that next week. But some of the really wilty flowers in plants did come back to life. This was one of those borrages that looked absolutely dead last week. This plant was looking pretty wilty and sad. It came back. This plant was looking very wilty and sad, and it came back. I still don't really like what it's doing with its leaves. It's kind of cupping them upward. This is not an ideal looking plant, but we'll leave it and see what it does. And this borage, it doesn't look like much, but that thing is coming back too. I think what happened with those is they had been in these little cell trays over here like this. They were getting bottom watered, and the roots were essentially just sitting in water pretty much all the time, and so they were being a little bit babied. And when I stuck them in the soil, they weren't used to being that dry. Not that the bed is dry, because it's not, but the transition was a little bit much on them and they got a little bit shocked, but they're okay now. Actually, I'm starting to work on the irrigation system, the new irrigation system for these beds. I'm using our original main line, down here that you can see. Over in the pepper row, we will eventually, when we don't get so much rain, be watering these peppers with the original system. But this is just drip tape here that feeds this whole row. And I can use this same line for the new system in these beds. The hope and the plan is to video the process of putting in this irrigation system this week. But it looks like this little tiny tube is going to connect in with that main line, and we're going to get a little spray of water out into the bed. So that is a this week project for sure. What I've been doing is just watering with the hose, and it has not been that much of a chore, but I do like to have some things automated, because if I can be multitasking, that's when I'm the most productive. And sometimes when it gets really hot in the summer, it is hard just to stand there and water and water and water. If I can just turn it on and walk away for 15, 20 minutes and come back and shut it off, that's better. Like, the plants actually get thoroughly watered instead of like so watered with me and my impatience. The cherry tomatoes have started to grow vertically a little bit. I transplanted these into the bed about 10 days ago as well. And so this guy is finally reaching up to the trellis, but it's not big enough yet to use my fancy new tool. The pepper row is actually doing really well. I've been trying this year to grow our peppers vertically up these strings, and it's going well. We have blossoms on the peppers. I've been coming through and pinching off suckers, much like you would for growing a tomato vertically. They have very surprisingly tolerated the flooding amounts of rain that they've been exposed to being planted in the ground here in the greenhouse. So fingers crossed, it's looking good. And the whole plan with the peppers is to prune them to 2 different liters. So you can see I've got an extra line on this one that I don't have over here. I probably could set this one up pretty soon, but it's still kind of short. See, this one has the 2 liters. Looking good. The green stalk in here is looking lovely. Maybe we'll go on the other side so you can actually see those blooms. There we go. They're really tall. I don't know why I didn't expect them to get this tall. I've grown Peruviana zinnia in the past. But see, when it comes to picking these for inside the house, what I will do is I'll look down the stem for where we're starting to get a little bit of side growth. And I do want to keep that side growth. So when I have been cutting these off, usually with scissors and not my fingernails, I have just been pinching right up above the growth like that to encourage it to bush out a little more. And we've got our flower. Isn't that gorgeous? Just like with any cut flower, the more you pick, the more they bloom. It encourages that side growth and the blooming. And these tiny little bouquets have made my day. When I've got to spend a few hours in the kitchen or whatever, these guys give me a little bit of a taste of the outdoors, and I love it. I did come through here and take out some of the pink celery for that potato salad that I made. This little pink celery doesn't get very big anyway, and it was really good. It had a lot of that classic celery flavor. It was actually quite surprising. I have grown this pink celery in the past, and I kept waiting for it to get bigger, and then it flowered, and then later I learned that it stays pretty small. So we didn't make that mistake this year. Some of them are still in here. Some of the plants on like the northeast side are growing a little bit slower, but that's just because they're not getting as intense of a sunlight exposure. That's okay. This allows us to have a succession harvest, which I'm not mad about. You guys see these down here? Well, we've got a spider doing her job there, but what she's built her web on, these are the pods to a radish plant. So it was a while ago that we planted radishes here in the green stalk, and I left a couple in here so that we could get pods. These pods actually provide more food than just the single radish alone, and it's a good way to get food out of a radish, especially if you live in a hot area where they tend to go to seed really quickly. You can pick these off and eat them fresh. You can saute them and put them in salad. They're a favorite of my kids. We've got another one down here. These flowers are pink. They've got the pods on them. And then when it comes to it, we could leave a few of the pods on to get dry and have more radish seed and just have a continual supply of radish. Whew. We have grown in this greenhouse for several years now without these flow fans. It's incredible. I just plugged those in, and you can just feel the difference. I should have done this a long time ago. I'm planning on getting a couple of these fans for my barn because the barn also gets really hot. A lot of me can't believe that I keep bringing you out to this area where I have nothing but weeds growing and talking about it, but this is where those chicken and dumplings cowpeas are gonna go. I do have a couple extra tomato plants that have in start pots that are gonna go out here, but this is the lane and it is too wet in the ground right now to plant inside of it, but hopefully very soon it will be manageable and we'll get this place planted. I've been walking along here wondering if we have any kind of volunteers. So far, I have not seen any. See, I do have some plants that I left out here that have succumbed. This is a birdhouse gourd. There's a lot of seed in there. We grew a lot of melons along the trellis last year, and you know, quite a few of them split and fell. I sort of half expected to see some, but you know, it didn't happen. That's all right. Melons are another thing that I'm gonna plant hopefully very soon, maybe over here along this trellis, but I was also thinking about putting them in the greenhouse because I have quite a few more of those birdies beds to put up in the greenhouse and to fill, and a lot of melons are a pretty quick turnaround. Are you guys enjoying those blackberry canes? They haven't attacked them as much as I expected them to. Well, that's what I have for you for the garden this week. Make sure you hang around, especially if you want to see that irrigation system for the raised beds and how that all works. I'll see you guys again soon.